lab is so what my lab is trying to think about is how to make autonomous robots collaborate with people. At Brown, we're really excited because we just got these two Boston Dynamics Spot robots, and they are literally the best robots that we have ever had that I've ever worked with, in terms of their raw coolness factor, but also how stable they are. They don't fall down. They come with a lot of autonomy. They can avoid obstacles. They can open doors. They can walk up and down stairs, and they really are capable of doing a lot of stuff. But the thing is, despite this really amazing and concrete advance, the way that they're controlled today is still with touchscreen. It's a really cool touchscreen, and if you've never um, gotten a chance to try to drive a spot, I highly recommend it. Um, but it's a touchscreen interface, so the user is still kind of using their hands and their eyes down on the interface, to tell the robot what it should do. And instead, what my lab is working towards is enabling you to tell the robot what to do as if you were talking to another person using natural language and using dialogue. So the challenge with this problem is that people use language in a really rich way. They like to talk about lots and lots of different things. And it's hard for the robot to know in advance what the person's going to talk about, or even where it is in the environment. So today I'm going to talk about one of the subproblems that we've been spending a lot of time thinking about, which is the problem of object search or finding objects in the environment. And the idea is that to do anything, it's probably like for the robot to do almost anything, it's going to involve objects. Objects are everywhere. We want to pick them up. We want to move them. We want to open doors. We want to open bottles. We want to pour things into other things. Um, everything that the robot's going to do is involving objects. And in order to do anything with any of our objects, we have to be able to find it first. So we're thinking about this problem as a framework where the person's going to say in words what object they want the robot to find, and then the robot, might be a drone, might be a spot, has to search in the environment and figure out where the object is. So we're formalizing this problem as a grid world where the robot has a map of the environment. So we assume that Slam ran already, and that we know where like the static objects are in the environment. So we might know in this example, there's a room with a library, a house with a library, a living room, and a kitchen. And the person is going to give information to the robot, like find the mugs in the library, the living room, or the kitchen. And then the robot's job is to explore the environment and find the objects. And we assume that the robot is equipped with a sensor model like a camera. So we will leverage all of these wonderful deep learned detectors, um, that has a limited field of view and that's capable of telling you if the object's there in the environment. So the robot's going to look, and then what the scene is showing is the belief state of the robot. So we're going to model this as a POM-DP. And the sort of light blue is where the object's likely to be, and the dark blue is where the object's unlikely to be. So here, after the robot looks in this direction, and then you can see the limited field of view, it doesn't see the object, so it's dark blue. So the belief update runs in the happy Bayesian way, and it says, oh, I don't see the object. So then we turn and look in a different direction, and sorry that the slides cut off there, and finds the object. So you get this like really, really light orange to say, look, oh yeah, I found it. And then the rest of the other update happens and the object has been found. So this is sort of the behavior that you want to have happen. And this is what will happen if you kind of naively put this into a POM-DP and you run the inference. The problem is that if you naively put this into a POM-DP and run the inference, in this sort of typical room-sized problem, it's going to take hours or days to find the policy. The policy will be the right thing, but it's going to take way too long to actually come up with this policy, way too many compute resources. So to address this problem, what we did is created a new algorithm and a new kind of POMDP, object-oriented POMDPs, where we factor the representation around different objects. So we assume that one object is conditionally independent of the locations of all of the other objects. And this leads to a new inference algorithm for solving object-oriented POMDPs, object-oriented POMCP, which is an extension to regular POMCP, which is one of the standard algorithms for solving POMDPs. And then when we sort of plug it into this framework, what we get is the ability to actually generate this sort of behavior. The robot will systematically drive to different rooms in the environment and look around until it finds the object, and kind of do its belief updates. So to evaluate this, we tried it in a bunch of different different variations of the algorithm. And my sort of favorite result is on the right here. And basically the thing to take away is that it works. So the dark blue line is sort of the known baseline where it already knows where the objects are and just drives to them. So that's like a fake baseline. It has extra information. And then the cyan line is our algorithm, and then the other lines around it are other iterations of our other variations with different parameters of our algorithm. And then the magenta line is POMCP, so that's the state-of-the-art baseline, and the red line's random. So that's a really dumb baseline where it just acts randomly for a long time. So you can see that the cyan line is really good, is much better than the baseline, and it's approaching the optimal performance. My favorite takeaway from this work is if you look at the graph on the far right, we tried it with different amounts of information coming in from language. So the first thing we tried is the misinformed case. So this is where the person is lying to the robot. The person's going to say, oh, the mugs are in the kitchen, but really they're in the living room. And what the POMDP ends up doing in this case is driving first to the kitchen, looking all around in the kitchen because you said it was in the kitchen, and then it doesn't find it. And then there's a smoothing term, so it does a belief update, and then it searches everywhere else until it finds the mugs or the object it was searching for. So the performance is worse than giving no information, but not a lot worse because it's able to recover from being lied to. So the sort of next information and the next condition is where we give it nothing. Instead of lying to it, we just say nothing to the robot. And then it's got to search the entire environment. So this is better. The performance here is better than if you lie to it. But it might be even better if you give it more information from language. So in the sort of ambiguous language case, you say it's in the kitchen or the living room, and you know it's not in the library. You're told it's not in the library. So the robot's given ambiguous information, but it's correct information. It is in one of the kitchen or in the living room. And here what happens is we do better than no information, and better than misinformed, because we're getting correct information and it's being incorporated into the belief state, the belief update. And then the last case, we say it's in the kitchen, and really it's in the kitchen. So we give it sort of concrete information from language. And in this case, it does almost as well as our baseline, where it just drives straight to the object, where it knows where the object is in the first place. And what's cool about this is we're doing much better than our uninformed baseline, our POMCP baseline, because our algorithm is so much faster at solving this. And this is like, if you're a POMDP Bayesian person, the fact that it's doing sort of these different things isn't surprising. What's really cool about it is that we're able to get this behavior that sort of POMDPs are really good at efficiently by running our algorithm, by using an algorithm, a new algorithm, object-oriented POMCP. Okay, and we made this run on a robot. In our robot demonstration, and it works, but our robot demonstration, you can kind of tell it's using AR tags for object detection. So it's able to do it in a realistic environment, but we're faking the object detection. We're not using real object detection. So this talk is called, this workshop is about scaling robot learning. And the first thing I presented actually had no robot learning. So now let's put some learning into the mix. So there's a really wonderful paper from Trevor Darrell's group at Berkeley that's capable, what we'd like to be able to do is actually understand natural language expressions that refer to objects in the environment and give a detector. So something like the top right clock, and then give it an image and have a bounding box or a mask, a segmentation mask that shows you where the image or the vase in the middle or the left striped chair, and comes up with the box with where the object is in the environment. And we'd like to be able to do this for lots and lots of different referring expressions in the environment, and without knowing in advance what the person's going to ask for, because there's a lot of different objects that could be referred to. So we're going to build on our previous work where we used an object-oriented POMDP to represent the problem, and model our detector as a fan-shaped sensor with noise. We can drive around and look for objects. But now we're going to try to see what happens with a real detector. So there's a really nice paper from Trevor Darrell's group that's doing this, that takes as input an expression of words as well as an image, and then outputs a segmentation mask. So it takes in RGB images and handles complex referring expressions. But the problem, there's sort of two problems with this work. One is that they make the assumption that the image that the robot's looking for is always, that the thing that the robot's looking for is always somewhere in the input image. So here, the robot's looking for a sink, and it's outputting a segmentation mask for the sink. And they're assuming that somewhere in the image, the sink is there. It's not nowhere in the image. But really, if you're a robot and you're driving around the environment, this is scenes from our evaluation set, you're looking for an object. Most of the images that the robot is collecting are actually not going to contain the object that you're looking for. If you actually knew where it was in advance, you wouldn't need to be looking for it. So this is scenes from one of our environments in our simulated test set, which is AI to Thor. And most of the images in this room don't contain the sink. And this is sort of showing this. If you're looking for a toaster, most of the images of this kitchen are not going to contain the object that you're looking for. So to address this problem, what we did, first we retrained the model. There was a new and larger data set available of referring expressions called RefCoco. So we retrained the model on this larger data set, and we retrained it with lots and lots of negative examples so that it was able to sort of say, look, this image that I'm showing to you, that you're showing me, actually doesn't contain the object, because that's like sort of what's going to happen most of the time. We need to be able to reject these images so we know to keep looking in the environment. The second thing that we had to do to kind of put these pieces together is recognize that objects that our detector is not going to work.
Stephanie, I'm sorry, I think your chat window is blocking the presentation.
My chat window. This window, or?
Yeah, exactly. If you could put it somewhere else, like it's on the slides.
Let me see. Huh, I thought I would save it as I was trying to share just the one window, but
yeah,
I guess
that's better.
That's better. Okay, sorry about that.
Thanks.
So we're training it on the RefCoco data set. And in our previous work, we were using a fixed observation model where the noise parameters of the observation model were fixed no matter what it was being returned. But really, the model is actually able to output a confidence score. And based on that confidence score, you can do a more fine-grained belief update that sort of takes that into account as the robot's finding the object. So we sort of made these two changes to the observation model, and then we tried it out in a realistic environment. So we're using the AI to Thor simulator, which has a bunch of different rooms. It's not quite photorealistic, but it's all right. And so we're able to use this to search for objects in the environment. Um, and we're going to give it lots and lots of negative examples. So negative example slide. So and this is sort of about how we're updating the observation model with these two parameters: sigma, which is the variance of a Gaussian centered at the detected object's location, and epsilon, which is the true positive rate. So how likely you are to see the object if it's there in the scene. So we evaluated this on 15 different rooms, 4 different types of rooms: kitchens, bedrooms, living rooms, and bathrooms. And they're sort of regular sized rooms. We used a grid cell environment with 30 different target objects. And we made up a data set of referring expressions that refer to those objects. And then to evaluate, we compared to using our fixed observation model, so a fixed ground truth sigma and epsilon that are estimated from our data, and then a bunch of different versions with dynamic observation model parameters. And then last, we generated a simulated perfect noisy sensor. So because it's simulation, we know where the object really is. So we simulated a sensor with ground truth sigma and epsilon, and this is showing. So it's not perfect in the sense that it's always telling you the truth. It's perfect in the sense that our sensor model is perfectly matching that the POMDP is using to plan is perfectly matching what we say it is, versus this deep learning detector, which is not, and you can see that because it's outperforming. So the thing to take away from these results is that our task completion rate, so how frequently we're able to find the object with a fixed ground truth observation model, is about 60%. And if you look at this brown line where you're using a dynamic sigma and epsilon for true positive rate and true negative rate based on the confidence score from the detector, we're able to improve the task completion rate by more than 10%. So the POMDP is able to use this extra information to do better at finding objects in the environment. But the other takeaway is that there's still a pretty big difference between this and our perfect model sensor. And we think this is because we're making an assumption that's incorrect. So we're assuming that observations from the camera are independent of each other given the true state. So if you're standing there and looking at a scene and you just look more than once, each of those is independent given the state, and eventually it's going to converge to like whether the object's really there or not. But we don't think that's actually true, because if you're just looking at the same image over and over again, the deep learned detector is not going to suddenly be like, oh my gosh, I think I see it now. And then it's going to be a similar image because there's going to be camera noise, but it's going to be essentially the same image. Especially if it's not seeing it because of the view that it's got, or if there's occlusion. So one of our things we want to try to do is have a better observation model that takes this into account, to kind of, so that the POMDP can reason about finding different viewpoints and stuff in the scene. Okay, so this is one way to handle the problem of landmarks in the environment that are being referred to when you're looking for objects. There's another way to kind of handle this. This is sort of turning to the problem of understanding natural language commands. So the challenge is that when people are giving natural language commands to robots, you might imagine they're like trying to understand commands in Providence, Rhode Island, which is where Brown is located. People like to sort of find these really exciting, distinctive landmarks in the environment. So we used to have this very distinctive sculpture of a big blue bear on our campus. And you could imagine saying to a drone, fly to the big blue bear. And it's a really wonderful landmark. The challenge is that if you are training in Providence, where there's this big blue bear, and then you go to some other city like Cambridge or New Haven or Philadelphia, um, the big blue bear is not going to be in those environments. And in contrast, there's going to be other really weird landmarks that are sort of by definition not in your training set. Like the thing that makes this a good landmark is that it's distinctive and unusual, and so therefore it's basically never going to be in your training set. So what we noticed was that it's bad that these aren't in your training set, but they are somewhere. These landmarks do appear in maps of these environments. So this sculpture, which was called Bluno, says lamp and bear, it shows up in the OpenStreetMap map of Brown's campus. So what we wanted to be able to do was to exploit this information to understand natural language commands. So our approach was to take the natural language input, like go to the medicine store, and then use an approach from the computational linguistics community called CopyNet that learns to identify noun phrases in the data and then extracts those noun phrases out as sort of quoted things, so it copies it from the input. And then we incorporate that into the LTL expression. We're using LTL, linear temporal logic, to represent what we should be doing for these commands. And then we can resolve the landmark by looking that up in our database. So in this work, we just used a cosine similarity model to try to figure out what object is being referred to. So medicine store comes up with CBS and Walgreens when we do this. So this enables us to resolve the landmark, and then we're able to follow the natural language command. So to test this out, we had 14 people give natural language commands to a drone that was simulated in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and there was no training data from this location. But despite this, they're able to successfully give commands to the system that work about 75% of the time. And we're kind of breaking down the different errors here. And this has never been trained in this city before. So this is cool because we're sort of able to scale this outside of places where it's been trained, and getting towards this vision of like unboxing your drone wherever you are. And as long as there's a map of the environment, then you're able to understand commands in this environment, in this place. So that's good. But to train this model, we're still using natural language commands paired with LTL expressions. So our training data set is on the order of hundreds of examples of language paired with LTL. And it's very laborious to collect this training data. Our Amazon Mechanical Turkers aren't able to annotate LTL. So we have to do it, and we just can't do that much because it takes so long to provide these annotations. And sort of, if you look at this kind of at a higher level, you look at existing robo NLP work. Almost all of the existing work is learning from a parallel data set of human language paired with some kind of abstract meaning representation, whether that's LTL or first order logic or some other representation that they made up. It's some kind of parallel data set that requires a lot of researcher curation to collect. And what that means is that you're really looking at small data sets of hundreds or thousands of examples. And when you compare this to existing work in human machine translation that's looking at human language pairs, this work is looking at parallel data sets of on the order of millions of examples, so much larger. And as a result, these systems are much more general and work much better. So we, so to kind of think about this, how to address this problem in robotics, um, I was turning to another example from the NLP community, the GeoQuery data set, which was created by Ray Mooney and his student in 1996. And this is a data set for question answering about geography. So the questions are things like what states border Texas? And then associated with that is a Prolog formal query against a database. And the output of that query is like coming up with the states that border Texas. Um, and in the original paper, the training instances consisted of sentences, English sentences, paired with not only the Prolog query, but also the parse tree, the English, the parse tree of that sentence. Then in 2005, Luke Zettelmoyer, his thesis, his PhD thesis, was to say, look, we don't need the parse tree. We still need English to go to logical form, to the formal representation, but we don't need the parse tree anymore. So the training data in our approach is only sentences paired with logical forms. And that's like what we're doing now in robotics. We're using sentences, English sentences paired with LTL expressions. We don't need the parse tree of the English sentences, so that's good, but we still need to go from English to we still need a training time English that goes to logical form. But with GeoQuery, what happened is in 2009, there was a bunch of new papers in this data set. Percy Leong and Michael Jordan and Dan Klein's was one of my favorites, that said, you know what, we don't need logical form at training time. We're going to consider the end-to-end problem of mapping questions to answers. So the logical formal semantic representation was not needed at training. It was latent. It was still used to solve these problems, but it was latent. And these approaches were able to reach human performance on this data set on answering these questions. So taking this work as inspiration, we turned to the problem of natural language and robotics, and we said, well, what's the equivalent of questions and answers? For us, that is going from natural language instructions, like walk along 3rd Street until you reach the intersection with Main Street, and not the logical form, but trajectories through the environment. So what we tried to do was make a system that's able to learn to understand natural language instructions by mapping to a logical representation, but never seeing that logical representation at training time. So our approach does this using LTL progression. So we're generating candidate LTL expressions and then converting those to a finite state automata, and then progressing
sorry, you have 1 more minute.
What's that?
Yep, you have 1 more minute.
Yep, I know. I'm good. If I have 5 more minutes, that's as expected. So thank you. All right. So we progress the automata against the trajectories. So we're checking at each step in the trajectory whether the LTL expression is satisfied or not. And what this lets us do is filter out LTL expressions that aren't satisfied by the trajectories, and essentially annotate the data set while learning our model to go from English to LTL. So to collect this data set, we showed people on Amazon Mechanical Turk 2 trajectories sampled from the kth shortest paths. And we asked them to give a natural language description that describes one trajectory while specifically excluding the other trajectory. We collected 3 different commands per trajectory. So that's almost 3,000 trajectories per environment for 10 different environments. So this is the largest collection of language mapped to trajectories. And it's possible because there's no LTL required at training time. So the LTL is completely latent. We don't need it in the training process. And to test it, we tested on 100 unseen trajectories with natural language commands of varying lengths. And we compute goal state accuracy. So how accurately did it end up at the sort of end spot of the trajectory? and edit distance between the generated trajectory and ground truth trajectory. So whether it followed the path that it was supposed to follow. Um, and um, and basically it works really well and much better than a sequence to sequence baseline that doesn't use the LTL representation at all. So we're able to more accurately end up at the goal location for a bunch of different environments, as well as having a lower, the second number is edit distance, we're having a lower edit distance in all of these environments. And this was sent to RSS in 2020. So this approach though still requires, like, you have to train in Providence in order to test in Providence. You can't train in Providence and then test in Cambridge, for example. So what we're working on now is trying to combine these two approaches so that we can use CopyNet to have landmarks that we can look up in a map, while collecting an even larger data set of trajectories for LTL. And what we hope is that this will enable us to do really, really well at understanding commands in city scale environments. So I'll finish up there. So in my lab, we're thinking about communication for collaboration, action for collaboration, and perception for collaboration by representing the world as a partially observable Markov decision process with LTL reward functions, and then trying to make it as realistic as possible. So using data that we can get from a robot sensors like a camera, as well as GPS and maps, to make robots that understand commands in real world environments. So I'll stop there.